All right. So on Tuesday, we talked about our personality profiles and what that assignment might look like. And so to be able to write a personality profile, we have to interview someone or some people. And so we know that for our personality profiles, you're going to be interviewing a classmate. So let's talk about what we need to do to appropriately conduct an interview. So our objectives for today are to describe how to prepare and conduct an effective journalistic interview, to identify pertinent background information that you might need to collect from the person or people you're interviewing. We're going to critique a brief radio interview and then also generate potential interview questions for your personality profile interview. So, the Fake AP style book on Twitter is pretty funny if you're a nerd like me. And something they tweeted several years ago said that to conduct an interview, go up to someone and ask them questions. It's not like it's rocket science. We know that you have to have some sort of plan in action to be able to appropriately conduct an interview. So let's talk about what we do before the interview, because we've got to be prepared before we get there. And usually for this part of the class, I like to break you up into your groups using my trusty playing card method, but clearly I'm not there, so we'll just walk right through these. So before the interview, some things we need to do is first identify who you need to interview. Okay? If you don't know who you're going to interview, you can't develop the questions that you're going to write for them. Do your research. You need to know some things about the person you are interviewing, and definitely know something about the topic. You know, you should have met your partner by now, or at least know who they are, so you can think about what kind of questions you might need to ask him or her. And you have to also kind of know the angle that you're wanting to take. Whenever it comes to writing for your client, you're going to have something in mind, and so the general topic you're going to be writing about, and so you ask questions that help you communicate about that topic. Same thing with your interview for your personality profile. So you've clearly got to schedule an interview time. For our class, we're going to be actually doing the interviews in class, so you will have plenty of time for that. But for the other writing assignments, for the ones with your client, you're going to have to schedule time outside of class to go and interview them. So whenever you're scheduling this interview, you need to explain why the interviewee was selected, and choose a good location. So good locations are quiet, preferably in a location that best meets the needs of your interviewee, because usually you'll go to them instead of having them come to you, because they are taking time out of their day to do something for you, essentially. So quiet, no distractions, and work with the interviewee schedule. Also make sure you find a good pen, notebook, and recorder. All three of these are very important. It can be a little, you might find yourself being like, oh, well, I'm recording it, I don't need to actually write this down. But notes are really important, especially whenever it comes to deciding which quotes to use and the angle to go, and how you want to set up your story. Because when you can write notes down as you're going, especially if you're like, oh my gosh, I really like that quote, you can write a little piece of the quote, so whenever you hear it in the interview, you could say, oh yeah, that one, I know what I want to use that for. So definitely make some notes. Also, if the person you're interviewing is speaking and they say something that you really like, that kind of spurs another question that you should ask, you can write that question down while they're still speaking without interrupting them. So we have to, before we get to the interview, prepare the questions. So some things that we should consider whenever we're preparing questions for an interview are, first, what information do you hope to uncover? You have to have questions to ask to be able to uncover the information you want to know. So if I can come out of this interview with only 3 things, what must they be? Those are things you need to ask fairly early on to ensure that you get that information. Then also, what does my audience want to know? What does your audience want to know about this person, about this company, about this organization, whoever you're writing, whatever your personality profile or whatever your topic is, because this is the topic of this lecture, is journalistic interviewing. So if it's a news story, what do they need to know? Okay, think about questions in order of importance, but you don't necessarily have to ask them in that order. So when we think about how we interview, how we write in the inverted pyramid style of writing. We'll get into that on Thursday, next Thursday. But we don't want to start out with the, hard-hitting questions to begin with. We want to ease into it and get some information about our interviewee and make them feel comfortable asking their name, asking them to spell their name, their major, making sure that you're correct in all of those things. Ask more general questions to begin with to help build a rapport with your interviewee. This is going to make it more comfortable for them to answer questions that might be a little bit more challenging or might need a little bit more thought. Probably not going to experience that in your personality profile, but possibly in your feature story or your news story. So I have an interview example here, which I'm not going to play right now. What you should do is you should pause this video, go and click the link in the module, listen to it, and then come back. Because if I play the interview right now, the way my screencast works, you will not be able to hear it, but I will. So I'm not going to have you sit here and wait for the interview. So pause the video, go listen to the interview, and then come back. So, based on the things that you heard in that interview, what kind of questions do you think would be beneficial for you to ask the person you're interviewing for your personality profile? Or how might you ask questions about a topic for your feature story or your news story? Okay. What you should notice in the interview you saw is that the individual kept questions short. Also, the importance of asking open-ended questions. You don't want a question that says where the person will answer yes or no. Yes is not a good quote for an article. So you need to have open-ended questions. Ask for examples. Can you give me an example of a time when you were challenged? Can you give me an example of a time when, whatever. Ask for examples. Ask for chronology. So what happened first, and then what happened second. Encourage anecdotes. In my teaching, I generally like to give anecdotes. I'll stop and say, okay, here's a good example of this, and then I tell a story. Ask them to give stories. This is especially important in your feature story because this is the first piece related to your client. So if they can give examples of when something happened or what someone might experience using their product or service, those sorts of things, that's definitely going to help make your article more robust. So encourage anecdotes. Make sure you're getting things in order that they happen. Get examples from them when possible. And make sure you're asking open-ended questions. So here's some interview questions. So a weak one would be, what is your favorite class? Well, clearly your peer is going to say this one, 4450W. But instead, ask, tell me about your favorite class. Oh, well, 4450W. I really love that class because I love to write. AP style is super fun. Reading the book before I go to bed each night is great. Dr. Steed is hilarious. He is fun to be around. You should take all of his classes because he's the best. That's probably the answer you're going to get when you ask someone to tell me about your favorite class, right? So, where did you teach before coming here? If you ask me this question, I would say Texas Tech University. But instead, if you said, what were the major differences between Texas Tech, where you taught before coming here, and Minnesota? What does this tell me? This says, A, you paid attention, you did your research, and you knew that I taught at Texas Tech before I came to Minnesota. So I could talk about the differences as far as how many students we have, the types of classes that we offer, graduate versus undergraduate programs, where we live, how warm and dry Texas Tech was versus how cold it is in Minnesota, campus life, all of those sorts of things. So I could go into a lot of detail and share anecdotes about how different our students are at Texas Tech versus how different a student might be here at the University of Minnesota. So we've prepared for the interview, we've written our questions, and so now we're about to start. So what we want to do is introduce ourselves. Hi, I'm Garrett Steed. I'm with the University of Minnesota. I'm here to interview you today because I have to for class. Explain clearly what you're doing. I'm going to be using this interview to write a personality profile. And then you're going to build rapport. What is rapport? A relationship with them. Help them feel comfortable. Next, you're going to ask permission to record the conversation. You're going to say, for this assignment, it would be really beneficial if you would allow me to record the interview so that I can make sure that I get all of your quotes right and that sort of thing moving forward. All of you should agree to be recorded in class, so don't say no. Outside of that, you may run into an issue where your person you're interviewing doesn't want to be recorded. In the years that I've taught this class, I've never had that be an issue, but it's the first time for everything. So ask for permission. If they do not give you permission to record, you're probably going to have to regroup and think about how to best take notes during the interview. So it's probably going to take a lot longer because you're going to have them stop. You're going to have to write down the full quotes, have them review that, those sorts of things. So if they say, no, I prefer if you didn't, you'll say, okay, I understand. This will slow the interview down a little bit so I can ensure that we're getting the quotes completely accurate. Is it okay if we do go a bit longer because, so I can fully capture what it is that you're sharing on paper? Probably the person will say, oh, it'll take longer. Okay, fine, you can just interview me. But don't ever pressure them and say, no, I really want to interview. I really want to record it. Don't ever pressure them. And always, again, I stated this earlier, check spelling of name and title. Make sure you're getting those correct. Someone writes down my name. I'm very picky about making sure you get all of the double letters. The extra T at the end of my first name, the E at the end of my last name. My title, I'm not assistant professor. I'm not professor. I'm teaching assistant professor. So making sure that you get down those things correct is very important. So as the interview is going on, you want to know your questions. Don't read them. So as they're speaking and you're recording and you're at a place where you don't necessarily need to, I don't need to write this down. You can kind of skim over your next question and be able to ask it to them. So you want it to feel like a conversation, not, you're holding it and saying, during the interview, know your questions, don't read them. Get the basic information you need. 5 W's and H. You don't want to be reading it to them. We don't want to hear you read. They didn't come for popcorn reading, okay? So, during the interview, you want to make sure you always get your 5 W's and H. What are those? Who, what, when, where, why, and how, okay? Who are you interviewing? Well, you know their name. You got that written down. Perfect. Who, what? What are you interviewing them about? Or, what happened? You're doing a news story. Who did it happen to? What happened? When did it happen? Where did it happen? Why did it happen? And how? Okay? You want to make sure before you leave an interview, make sure you can answer all the 5 W's and H's because those are going to be used as the major skeleton for your article. And those are also going to come into play when we talk about leads. So writing our leads. It's also important to learn to listen. Let the interviewee do almost all the talking. Don't provide commentary. Don't say, oh yeah, that happened to me one time. This isn't the time for all of that. And make sure you get good quotes. I generally say my favorite quote usually comes from, is there anything else you'd like to add? Which is usually my last question I always ask. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Or do you want to summarize this experience? Whatever, based on what your topic is, what your angle is, you can often get your best quote in that very last question that you ask. Okay? So let them do all the talking. Don't give commentary. Shake your head in agreement, that kind of stuff, that's fine. But commentary can get things off course. And like I said, don't write down everything, but don't rely exclusively on your recorder either. Double, triple, quadruple check that your recorder works. And you probably don't have a regular recorder. You probably are going to use your phone. And there's, several ways that you can record on your phone. I have an app called Voice Record. It's just called Voice Record. The app itself looks like red. Starts with red and goes down through a black gradient and has like an old school microphone with headphones hanging on it. That's my favorite one. That's the one I use. I like it because it does allow you to export it into Dropbox or as an MP3 MP4, or email it to yourself. You can also, in the app, slow this playback speed down so you can more clearly hear quotes as you are using those, that sort of thing. So I really do like that app, but you can use any program you like for recording, but make sure that you record. Also, ask the source to repeat him or herself. If you didn't quite hear anything or it sounded mumbled, the person has a heavy accent that you can't quite understand, make sure you you get them to repeat it again so you can have that accurate for you there, especially if you say, oh, that sounds like something I could definitely use. Make sure you understand the words used. So ask for clarifications. If I'm speaking to someone, I'm going to try, and someone's interviewing me, I'm going to try not to use jargon or acronyms when I'm interviewing someone, because I know that can be confusing, but also I teach how to do this, so I understand that it can be confusing. So sometimes you might have to say, can you clarify that? So what does that stand for? What does that mean? I was doing an interview one time where I was interviewing pre-service ag teachers, and one of them kept using the term, I don't remember what term they used, but it was essentially for when students need special accommodations in your classroom, whether it's more time on a test, whatever, something of that nature. And they used some jargon or acronym for that, and I was like, I don't know what that means. What does that mean? And so I had to get this person to tell me fully what it was so that moving forward I could use that in my quotes if I needed to make sure the reader understood what we were talking about. Okay? Repeat questions if necessary. You can avoid this by not making double-barreled questions. So, 2 questions and 1 long question. You won't have to come back and ask the second one or whatever. Pace the interview. If they're getting really long-winded about one topic, encourage them to move on. Maybe you get rid of questions. You kind of change the question, or be very flexible in your interview. Maybe you came up with this is the angle I want. These are the questions I'm going to ask. But then they say something and you're like, oh my gosh, that's so interesting. One time I had a student in this class who was doing their personality profile, and they found out that this person in their class was an MMA fighter, and he was going to Las Vegas to compete. And the student who was interviewing him was found that out and just put it in the story and moved right along and kept being what's your major? Where are you from? Blah, blah, blah. It shouldn't be a resume. As we said on Tuesday, it shouldn't be a resume. What you should have done is said, oh, you're an MMA fighter? Let's go tell me more about that. How did you get into that? His whole personality profile could have been about his experience as an MMA fighter. So find something very unique or interesting about your person. Don't just give us a resume of what they are. That's not what we're looking for here. If you find something out that's very interesting during your interview, you can completely change your angle and go with that. Be flexible. So, always, as I said a little bit earlier, in closing, ask if he or she has anything to add. You're probably going to get a better quote for something like this in your feature story or your news story than in the personality profile, because they may not know what angle you're going with. But always ask, do you have anything else you want to add? And so after the interview, what you want to do is immediately find a quiet place to write down extra details. So go, review, make some details. If you have a short little outline of okay, I want to talk about this, then this, then this. That will help you make sure you stay organized before you go to your next step. Okay? Then fill in the notes where you can. And then check your recording. Make sure it recorded. If it didn't, oh God, you may need to contact them to either reschedule, but what I would first do is try to, part of this is you go through, write down some details, some keyword things that you liked, these quotes, and then if you can put together your story based on that, you can go back and say, hey, I had an issue with the recording. You discussed this. Can you restate that, please, or whatever. Or have them discuss it again to fill in those blank places in the quotes. So, interview. Time spent preparing for an interview is time well spent. Make sure you prepare for your interview. Clearly, we're going to finish this lecture today earlier than when we would in an hour and 15-minute class. Use the rest of the time today to prepare your interview questions. Ask good questions and listen during the interview. And finally, review your interview when done to identify key quotes and areas of missing information. So, on Tuesday, you're going to come to class. You're going to have at least 10 questions you will ask in your interview. Your questions need to be done. You need to have at least 10 questions you're going to ask in your interview. A good personality profile, you're going to have more than 10, but you have to have at least 10. Okay? This will be an in-class grade. Okay? You'll also be prepared to conduct your interview, so have your recording device with you. Have something to take notes on, have your recording device, and communicate with your peer if you will not be here. Okay? Make sure you're in communication with your peer. Alright, so your client justification is due today, so make sure that was submitted before class. I'm pretty sure that's the time frame that I have it listed, is either before class starts or by the end of class, so you do have some time left by the end of class if you haven't submitted it. With that, I will see y'all on Tuesday.